Hello, good morning everyone. It's great to see all of you with us on behalf of the organizers, that is the University of Silesia and Research Center for Public Policy and Regulatory Governance. I would like to welcome all of you very warmly at this seminar. It is a working meeting, so without any formal opening speeches or this kind of ceremonies, I would like to start our first session. As you know from the program, our seminar will be composed of basically 3 sessions. The first will be devoted to law and criminal policy, and the keynote speaker in this session will be Professor Hadar Dancig-Rosenberg from Bar-Ilan University. We're very grateful that you are with us. Then we will have obviously time for discussion, and then after coffee break, the second session will be devoted to legal policy and new technologies. There our keynote speaker is Professor Nikolaus Forgó from the University in Vienna. Welcome, Nikolaus, to our seminar. And then after lunch, the third and final session of our seminar will be law and climate policy, and then our speakers will be Professor Alexandra Harrington from the University of Albany in New York and Professor Claire Cordonner-Zeger from University Cambridge. Welcome. And at the end, after this busy and working and hopefully fruitful day, we will have a small surprise to all of you, those of you who will survive and stay with us until the very end. And now I can disclose that carefully kept secret, that this surprise will be a movie performance at the small cinema that we have in this building of our movie school, and we will be presented with, I guess, 2 short movies produced by students of our university, or this movie school that we are in. Okay, so if I may ask Professor Hadar Dancig-Rosenberg. Hadar is, if I may, by way of introduction, say a couple of words. That Hadar is the professor at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. Hadar specializes in criminal law and procedure. Her field of research includes non-adversarial criminal justice, therapeutic jurisprudence, the philosophy of criminal law, and the interface between criminal and constitutional law. Hadar was a visiting scholar at the University of California, Berkeley in the years 2016-2018. And Professor Dancig-Rosenberg is a member of the advisory committee for the Israeli Ministry of Justice on Criminal Procedure and Evidence Law, as well as a member of the advisory committee for the Israeli Ministry of Justice on formulating measures to protect the public against cyberbullying. The title of today's speech that Hadar is going to deliver is Characterizing Multi-Door Criminal Justice. Hadar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, first for this generous introduction, and also for this great invitation. I just met Professor Tomasz at a conference in Cambridge, and we just started to speak over, dinner it was, I think. And the conversation was so interesting. We just figured out that although we come from totally different, field in law, we can communicate and speak about everything. So it's really a great honor of me to be here. And I'll even tell you a secret. I told Tomasz that my family originally is from Poland. So both from Gdansk, this is my Dancig, with the name, and from Białystok. So it's the first time for me to be in Poland, and it's still very good to come to the regions. So thank you very much for this. So the study that I'd like to present today is a part of a large empirical study that I've been conducting with my colleague and great friend, and Professor Hadar. She's the head of the School of Criminology at the University of Haifa. And we call this project the Multi-Door Criminal Justice. And I want to today to try to give you kind of an overview of this project and to describe you the different stages and the whole idea of what we're doing here. Maybe I'll start and say that in last May, we hosted at Bar-Ilan University and the University of Haifa a big international conference, that was just under this theme. And many scholars came from all over the world and wrote about the different doors that we have today in criminal justice. And only 2 days ago, I got the first volume out of 2 of a special issue that is titled The Multi-Door Criminal Justice that Tali and I was co-editing. And it actually kind of summarizes all the, what I'm doing in the last 3 or 4 years. So it came just on time this time to present this in front of you. So in order to understand what is multi-door criminal justice, I'd like to start with a very brief background. So in 1976, Harvard law professor Frank Sander envisioned that by the year 2000, not simply a courthouse, but a dispute resolution center. And he portrayed this center as kind of a sophisticated institution comprising of various divisions and devices to provide different responses to different civil cases. And that's what he said. He said, we lawyers have been far too single-minded when it comes to dispute resolution. We have tended to assume that courts are the natural and obvious and only dispute resolvers. In fact, there exists a rich variety of processes which may resolve conflicts for more effectively. And Sander described various methods of dispute resolution that will be used to resolve conflict in this multi-door courthouse, and spoke about adjudication by courts. He spoke about mediation, about conciliation, about arbitration. He spoke about negotiation, fact-finding, ombudsman, and kind of a blend of all of these. And he focused mainly on civil non-criminal disputes. But in the last few decades, we can see that this vision of a multi-door system has become a reality also in the sphere of criminal justice as well. And in the last few decades, we can see that criminal justice systems in post-industrial societies, both in Anglo-American countries, but also in continental countries, and maybe we'll reach this in the discussion when I'm used to present and to teach in Anglo-American countries, but still I think that we have many linkages here also to what's going on in continental European law, so we'll get to it later. But we can see that the criminal justice system has undergone enormous changes. Some social movements like alternative dispute resolution, therapeutic jurisprudence, community justice, the victim rights movement, and more have started to undermine the supremacy of the punitive and adversarial nature of the mainstream criminal justice system, at least in Anglo-American systems. The adversarial criminal process, which is the prevalent model of the 20th century, again, in Anglo-American countries, again, was widely criticized by scholars. And scholars are starting to search for improvements, advocating for more democratic, non-adversarial, collaborative, therapeutic, problem-solving oriented strategies within the criminal justice system. We can see also that the role of the state as a sole authority to respond to crime has also been questioned, emphasizing the interest of the community in resolving conflicts. You can see that restorative justice, for example, really, which is very popular also in Europe, try to push to this kind of direction. And concurrently, we see that debate about emotional effect of crime and the psychological needs of both victims and offenders has initiated reforms and innovative processes that promote dialogue between victim and offenders and apology to the victim. So inspired by Frank Sander, vision of this multi-door courthouse in the non-criminal sphere, Tali and I coined the term multi-door criminal justice to reflect, contemporary criminal justice systems in post-industrial societies. And this metaphor seeks to reflect the multiplicity of processes, mechanisms, values, and goals that we have today, that coexist today in the modern criminal justice systems worldwide. This variety of punitive and non-punitive criminal justice mechanisms include, for example, arraignment hearings, which are kind of very swift processes to try to bring the parties to please. And problem-solving courts, which is totally different model I will speak about a little bit later. Restorative justice processes, diversion programs, and more, each representing a door in a multi-door system. Although the various doors differ in their characteristics, prevalence, and outcomes, they each is suitable, of course, to in different circumstances for different cases. Still, they are all at the same time part of a rich, complex system that provides social responses to crime, and that's why this project started from our goal to look at all of these processes together and try to understand what is going on today in this system that becomes to be more sophisticated, more complex. It consists of many different processes that even contradict in their ideologies. And the goal of the project is to explore this variety of criminal justice mechanisms that coexist today, to uncover their characteristics, to compare between them, to try to recognize the values and the ideologies that each process seeks to promote. So this is kind of an introduction to what we were trying to do. And of course, this project has a kind of a universal aspect. This kind of multi-door system we can find in many countries, both in Europe and in the Anglo-American sphere. But also it has like a local aspect. We wanted to go to the field and to check what is going on in Israel in this regard, which is a very interesting system in the sense of it is based on the Anglo-American tradition, on the common law basically. But we can see that during the last few decades, there are many influences by European law in the Israeli system. So I think that, it's kind of a blend. It's a system which is mixed. It's not pure common law, and it's not American, right? We don't have juries, although the adversarial process is still the prevalent one. But we have many influences, and especially in criminal law. The German law, for example, the German penal code is very, influences very much the Israeli criminal law. So it was very interesting to take Israel as a case study and to look at it because, it gives us kind of a mixed system, which is really interesting to look at. So focusing on the Israeli arena, the specific study that I want to present to you today is based on a cross-mechanism case study analysis of 3 criminal justice mechanisms that are operating in Israel. I'll introduce you very quickly the 3 processes that we were looking into, and then I'll show you what we did in order to compare between them, okay? So we'll start with the first mechanism that we were trying to look at. So arraignment hearings are pre-adjudicative hearings representing the adversarial process. They seek to save judicial time and encourage agreements between the defense and the prosecution. So it's basically kind of a plea bargain, a way to reach to plea bargain. At the courthouse, usually regarding these hearings are typically crowded with litigants and with lawyers, family members, and passerby. You can see here the mess, right? Lots of happening around. Some have even described these processes as a clearance cell, right, which operates as an assembly line. The judge hears a few dozen of cases in a typical day. The hearings are very short and swift, and most of cases indeed ends in pleas. The second process that we were looking into is community courts. The Ramle and Beersheba community courts. So these are a variant of the problem-solving court model that emerged in the 90s, designed to address the root problems that lead to repeat low-level offending and offer a rehabilitative alternative to jail. The point is in this processes is to try to identify what was the root cause that led the offender to reoffend, in order to try to deal with the resolving door syndrome, in which a person is committing a crime, then he goes to jail, then he becomes to be a professor to crime in jail, right? It's not rehabilitated at all, like we know, jail, and then he goes back to society, he committed again crimes, and then he got for a longer term in jail, and it's so expensive, and it's insufficient, and it's not non-human. I mean, people really felt that something is wrong with their system. It just doesn't work. Nothing works, right? This famous phrase. So the idea in this court is to try to understand, to look not at the offense that that person committed, but at the more wider or broader background that led him to do it. For example, if someone is committing all the time, burglaries, then I will try to understand why he does it, right? And then I'll figure out that he's just addicted to drugs and he needs money. So of course it won't help if I put him in jail and then he will come to, because he's still addicted. I will try to give such a response to the addiction problem and then to take care of the root cause and not only at the symptoms. So that's the idea. And there are many courts, problem-solving courts in the US, for example, and also worldwide. Each of them, focus on a different problem. The mental health courts and drug courts and community courts and veteran courts and many more. The idea is that the judge plays a leading role here to motivate individuals to accept needed services and to monitor their compliance and progress by applying a mixture of therapeutic jurisprudence, problem solving, and community justice principles. The court convenes usually once a week, sometimes once in 2 weeks, and the day begins with a team meeting in the morning in which each case is discussed only by the professionals. Community court teams include a community court judge, a coordinator, a community social worker, a police prosecutor, a public prosecutor, and a public defense attorney, and they all work together. It breaks the typical adversarial model of prosecution versus defense that we have in Anglo-American systems, and it creates kind of a more collaborative team that work together in order to bring the offender to rehabilitation. Defendants are encouraged to speak directly with the judge, who uses carrots and sticks as incentives. Sometimes he praises on the successes of defendants. Sometimes he warns or expresses disappointment when they fail to comply. And in Israel, 2 community courts have been operating since 2014. One in Beersheba, which is a big city in the south of Israel, and the other is in Ramleh, which is a city quite in the center. But both, generally speaking, of course, conflict cities with heterogeneous population. And the current study focused on the processes of these first 2 courts. They both adhere at the same time to the same model initiated and developed by Ashalim, JDC, the Joint Distribution, a semi-governmental organization in collaboration with the government ministries. And today, 4 more community courts are operating in Tel Aviv, in Tzrat, in Haifa, and in Jerusalem. And basically today we have 6 community courts representing 6 districts that we have in Israel. Now I'll just mention that the Israeli model of the community courts, it got its inspiration from the Red Hook Community Justice Center in Brooklyn, in New York. So we basically adapted, this model from there. But it differs from the American model in the higher level offenses that it accepts. Basically, eligible offenders are those that are expected for a 1-year incarceration sentence should they be referred to the mainstream court, and in the comprehensive and the lengthy intervention program that its clients are assigned to. So the average process takes, 13 or so months. So it's quite a long process. The third process that we were looking at is restorative justice conferences. So you can see very, very different processes. The first 2 are court-based, and restorative justice conferences is out-of-court process. This program, the Mosaica Restorative Justice program, is a program that facilitates community-based restorative justice conferences that engage victims, offenders, and their supporters and community representatives together in a direct dialogue relating to the impact of the crime and the desired ways to repair its damage. the program deals with trivial violence, and property crimes that are conducted by adults. Despite the robust professional, training that the program facilitators received through the Ministry of Justice, only 21 full conferences were held between 2008 and 2015. So you can see that restorative justice is still new also in Israel. But although the number of case files is small, we chose to look at this program first because we could take all the cases that were down there, right? So we don't have the problem of selection bias or so, we have all the sample. Second, because of its strong fidelity to the core values of restorative justice. It's a model that's considered to be very, with a high model fidelity. And also the detailed documentation that was available regarding each case file. It's something, when you conduct an empirical study, it's very, the methodology point is very hard. So you need to find really a program that substantively really fits, right, what you need, but also a program that actually, has like the detailed enough documentation and everything, and this was a perfect one. Because it was very highly detailed. We got protocols that documented all the reparation meetings and preparation meetings and the reparation plan and the conversation between the facilitator and the parties and everything. And it was very easy, to understand what was going on there because the documentation was very good. So. What we did, we chose to start with an empirical examination of these three processes in Israel, and we chose specifically these three because they represent, three prominent mechanisms that have become common worldwide, and they have distinct types of procedures and manifested goals. So we thought it would be interesting to look at these three. And despite the significant differences among them, they all share a mutual denominator of the offender admitting the crime. So basically, all these three procedures, they don't involve evidentiary hearing, but rather focus on the desired outcome of an agreed upon offense. So what did we do? In relation to each of the two court-based mechanisms, namely the community court and the arraignment hearing, we conducted quantitative structured observations by 4 coders concurrently to achieve a multi-rater agreement, multi-rater coding. I mean, we sent 4 people to observe the same cases, and we asked them to code the cases, okay, because we wanted to check their agreement and to see that, that the coding was not like very subjective, that they got to close results, right, to get more, to understand that it was, to get stronger results. At each observation, the research team members, they filled a coding sheet that I'll show you in a moment to capture the characteristics of each specific hearing. Together, we collected 4 coding sheets relating to approximately 75 cases heard in each of the 2 court-based programs, reaching a total of 600 coded sheets. Similar coding sheets were also filled in relation to the archival documentation of the 21 finalized mosaic restorative justice case file, yielding additional 84 coding sheets, and each file contains a detailed description of phone calls, preparation meetings, as I said, the correspondence with the stakeholders, as well as the indictment, which was, the basis for the RJ process and the reparation agreement. And although the coding process itself is a subjective process, again, the coding of each case by 4 coders monitored validity, right? That's what we were seeking to achieve stronger inter-rater agreement between coders, right, could enable us to reach to robust findings of the nature of each justice mechanism. So the coding sheets were based on the criminal law taxonomy, which is a methodology that Tali and I developed in a previous study, a tentative but theoretical studies for measuring process, stakeholders, substance, and outcomes-related characteristics of diverse criminal justice mechanisms. The taxonomy consists of a set of 17 characteristics, which we call parameters. So parameters basically is the characteristic traits. And you can see that each one of the characteristics are presented on a scale with two opposing ends. It's a continuum, basically. As you can see here, the parameters are grouped into 4 clusters, 4 families. So the first family is what we call process-related parameters. And it includes elements that describe the format, the structure, and the procedural characteristics of each mechanism. For example, the first one, does the process facilitate victim-offender dialogue or doesn't facilitate victim-offender dialogue? Is the process flexible or formal? Namely, is the process allows us to, it's a tailor-made one? It relates to each case as a case that enables us to use evidence law accordingly to the case itself, or it just force us to use the same structure in a very rigid way. Does the process is it non-hierarchical or hierarchical? Namely, does the process actually treat the different stakeholders according to their titles, positions? You can see very strict hierarchy, professionals versus non-professionals, and also within the non-professional offender is above the victim or not. Or basically it's a process that in non-hierarchicality just treats the parties as equal, right? Is it voluntary or coercive? Again, how much the process grants the offender the option to choose, to voluntarily choose to go into, or it's basically coerced on him, right? He can't really choose. And then we have the second group of the stakeholders-related parameters, which include, for example, the characteristics of layman-centered versus professional-centered. How much the process is, grant layman people, namely non-professional people, decision-making power. How much it involves them. Or maybe it's a very professional-centered process. It doesn't, give the, people who are not non-professional any decision-making power. Victim-oriented versus non-victim-oriented. How much the process takes into account the needs, the wishes, the interests of victims. How much victims are in the picture, or maybe they're just out of it. And the same with offender. Offender-oriented versus non-offender-oriented. Namely, how much the process itself puts the focus on the offender with its whole, interests, needs, wishes, and more. Yeah, how much we really see him and not, other public interests that are not related to the offender itself. So inclusive versus exclusive, another parameter that relates to the stakeholders because it asks how much the process invite people to take part in. How much it's inclusive. It welcomes more people to participate, to come, to take part. Community representative, family members, victims of course, and more. Or not. It's a very exclusive one. Basically wants only the stakeholders, the direct stakeholders, to be there, like prosecutor versus the offender, right? And then community managed versus state managed. Again, how much the process is community managed, how much it gives community representative the power, the option to take part in the process itself, or it basically sees only the state as the one who has the monopoly to regulate crime, yeah? And then we have this group, this family of substance-related parameters, which are which actually relate to the values that are at the heart of each mechanism. How much the process adopts a needs-based terminology or focus more on rights. Yeah, how much it's emotional discourse, it encourages emotional discourse or non-emotional discourse. How much emotions are welcome there. How much the process actually enables the parties to express their emotions there, or maybe no place, no room for emotions, right? And then we have the other one, and I don't want to take too much on this, but the last family is outcome-related parameters, and this actually focuses on outcomes itself, the results of the process. How much is future-oriented, or cost-oriented, namely, goes more to the punitive and the retributive, lenses, or it adapts more the future lenses of the incapacitation, deterrence, and more. And you have here rehabilitates versus incapacitates and more. So basically, this was the tool. This was the methodological tool that we used. And by the way, the process of creating this taxonomy is very interesting in itself. I can maybe elaborate in the Q&A if you like to discuss it, how we actually reached to this kind of, it was a very interesting process to do. But I'll just say that each one of the characteristics of the parameters has a concrete definition that we give in this article that that suggests this tool, and it discusses each one of the meanings of each one of the characteristics and demonstrate how to use it. So the innovative, I'll just say that the innovative. The innovation of the taxonomy is in the effort to bring together many characteristics, creating a matrix that can help evaluate, compare, and select different criminal justice mechanisms in various circumstances. And I'll say that while evidence-based studies usually compare between mechanisms, between processes, mainly focusing on measuring effectiveness, namely recidivism, costs, and so, this tool offers a comparison that is based on measurable parameters that describing the traits of this mechanism. So we don't measure here effectiveness. We don't measure money and cost-benefit analysis. That's not the point. It's like more kind of a qualitative examination of the essence of these processes, but again done by a quantitative way that you can measure. Bear in mind, last point, that the taxonomy itself, it does not prioritize the parameters. I mean, it doesn't say that the parameter of flexibility is more important than the needs-based versus right-based. It doesn't prioritize it, nor does it contend that either end of the scale is inherently better than the other. I mean, we don't try to claim here that the left side hand of the scale is better than the right side of the scale, and I can tell you that when we discussed with scholars about this taxonomy, it really depended on the audience that we presented in front of, because when you speak with ADR people or people who are in the field of justice and victims' rights, for them it's obvious that the better side is the left side, right? Sure. But then when you speak with constitutional law professors, for them, of course, the better side is the right side, because this is the constitutional equality. The formal and the hierarchical and the standardized, right? And not the one that is tailor-made. So the point in the taxonomy that we don't try to make any, normative statements here, but we just propose this tool and leave others to decide the relative importance of each parameter and each side of the scale. Okay, so based on this taxonomy, we sent 4 coders to the field. They got each one coded each case using this coding sheet. So basically, it's just a taxonomy, but we just put it on on a coding sheet. You can see a scale from 1 to 7, and we just told them, please observe the case as is, without speaking with each other, of course, and just mark, very quickly, according to what you see, in each one of the characteristics, the number, the grade that you give to each case. So that's what they did. And after they completed this rating process, we checked the inter-rater agreement score, which is called in the methodological literature the IRA score, for each one of the parameters in each one of the cases. So that was the point, and we wanted to verify that the parameters were clear enough, that they were applicable, that people could understand what they mean and really implement them on what they saw. It's not just theoretical, but when you see a case, you know to say if it's flexible or not, to translate it to reality. And in this chart, and this slide, you can see the IRA score for each parameter relating to the community court hearings. This is the left column, and then you see the arraignment hearings, the middle column, and the restorative justice column to the right hand side. 1 indicates perfect agreement, and 0 indicates basically random coding, right? They didn't agree at all. So you see that all IRA scores were at acceptable level, which with only parameter 4, the level of voluntariness of the process, producing weak IRA as it relates to community courts. You see, I just marked this in gray. So this was very weak. Namely, the coders didn't agree between themselves about it, and it's possible that's the reason we try to think why specifically this parameter in community courts produced such a weak IRA, and then we thought that maybe some of the coders emphasized the fact that offenders were regularly asked whether or not they were willing to stay in the program, whereas others took note of the fact that offenders were threatened by the possibility of being referred back to the to the mainstream criminal court, and therefore they continue with the program despite despite reservations. So each one of the quarter just decided to give more emphasis on something else, and that's why we got it. So we just took it out. We put it out of the analysis because it basically shows us that we can't learn anything about from this parameter in this process. So let's see the results. After we measured this inter-rater agreement, we saw that they agreed. Now we moved to calculate the average score that each process received across each one of the parameters. And here is the summarizing slide. So again, just translating you all this mess. Again, taxonomy, you see one side against the other. This is the continuums from 1 to 7. And I marked the average grades that each process received in each one of the characteristics. You can see here, community courts in green, arraignment hearings are in blue, and restorative justice in red. So, generally speaking, the overall impression, when you just look at it without trying to get into the details, what do you immediately see? You can see that, that the arraignment hearing are at the right-hand side, of the taxonomy, meaning they are aligned with traditional criminal practices of formal, hierarchical, professional-centered, and offender-focused discourse. You can see that restorative justice gatherings tilt toward the left-hand side of the taxonomy, meaning they offer vastly different practices of informality, emotion, and victim-oriented, and offender-focused. Hearings at community courts are somewhere in between, with greater differentiation. They're scattered, across the various parameters. We can also see that community courts and restorative justice, they share 3 characteristics that comes together. So we can see that first, the extensive use of needs-based terminology. They're both, they're in the same area. Also, they're offender-oriented, focusing much of the attention on the offender's needs and rights. You can see it here, Again, they come together, restorative justice and community courts. And third, the constructive use of the various stages of the process promote the intended goals of the models, which is this parameters, process as enabling versus process as limiting. How much the procedural process actually promotes the design and the declared goals of the process. When we look deeper into the details, we can find some interesting results here. So let's start with a few examples focusing on community courts. Look at parameter 6, please. This, victim orientation. So as expected, restorative justice was coded as highly victim oriented, while arraignment hearings almost totally ignored victims. It is interesting to see that community courts disregarded victims during court hearings just as much as arraignment hearings. Look here. You see, the community courts and arraignment hearings are just together. They just ignore victims. This finding shows that community courts fail in some way to address the effects of crime on the community. And after all, who among community members is more affected by the crime than the victim, right? So given that expectation, the analysis highlights that the failure of the Israeli model, at least at the time of observation, to include victims in the hearings, to promote dialogue with them, and to address their needs and wishes. Then look please at parameter 2 and 3, the formality and the hierarchy. So here again, you see that restorative justice and arraignment hearings were coded as expected, informal, and non-hierarchical versus completely formal and hierarchical. While community courts tilt less toward formality and hierarchy, the differences from arraignment hearings in these parameters are small. So it appears that the positioning of community courts within the criminal justice system allowed them to divert only a little from the strict rules of the criminal process. Then you can see the involvement of outsiders at parameter 5 and 8, right? Layman-centered and inclusive versus exclusive. So you can see here again that RJ and arraignment hearings were coded as expected, were managed solely by professionals, and excluded those considered outsiders to the daily operation of the court, while restorative justice involved non-professional players in decision-making. They allowing community representatives to have a meaningful role in the process. However, community courts, again, were coded as granting very little decision-making power to those who were non-professionals, right? The score here is 2.2. And the process was run almost solely by state representatives, almost to the same extent as arraignment hearings. Another one is emotional discourse. So you see here again, although community courts and restorative justice share the same level of openness to need-based discourse, community courts were less open to expression of emotions. And this was a little bit surprising. I mean, we expected when, court, use carrots and sticks and the therapeutic, they use sometimes the therapeutic language and so, and it's a very rehabilitative oriented process. We expected that emotions would be there more, right? They're part of they're a tool in trying to run this game, right? And although the defendant expressed authentic emotions like gratitude, remorse, excitement, and frustration, the court personnel were often more reserved in their reaction to such expressions. So this was interesting to see the relatively low score. Then you can look at parameter 13, communitarian versus liberal. This is a parameter that actually tries to understand whether the process adopts a liberal approach, which means it perceives the offender as an individual, autonomous, agent, and it ignores the relationship between offenders and the society and the community, or it adopts like more communitarian approach, which means that it doesn't look at the offender as an individual agent, but it also takes into account the fact that the offender is a part of a broader net of relationship with others, and it also put some responsibilities on others because of it, and so. And here we see that, as we expected, the discourse at the arraignment hearings was highly liberal in the sense that it assumed autonomic and individualistic defendants holding personal responsibility for their deeds. But it was surprising to reveal that community courts reflect an approach more aligned with the liberal approach, rather than a communitarian one. You can see that the grade here to community courts, right, it's 2.3. It's quite low. It's liberal, much more than communitarian, and it's a community court. I mean, the whole point is to try to look at the offender, right, within this right, a complex net of relationship with others. But courts basically didn't go with it all the way. And although court aspires to consider defendants within their social and familial network, the low average scoring suggests that the community ties of offenders were seldom recognized, and RJ processes, of course, were recorded as highly communitarian as we expected. So I'll just say one thing here. This study focuses only on what we saw in the court. I mean, in the two court-based programs, we observed, we asked the coders to give grades only to what they saw during the hearings at the court. I will say that, you know, our broader, Tony and I, we conducted the first formative study on community courts in Israel, and now we're conducting the evaluation study. This is a continuation study, and during the, as part of the broader study, we also conducted ethnographic observations, both of in-court activities and out-of-court activities. So coders were also sent to other out-of-court activities to observe what is going on, not in the courtroom, but this didn't get into this analysis. So it doesn't mean that, you know, all the things that you see here reflect the whole process as a whole, right? It reflects what is going on in the court, which, for example, in community courts is only partially. It is only partial, right? Because many interactions in community courts, for example, they happen outside the court hearings. The interaction between the offender and the coordinator, and for example, part of the activities that participants, like they call in community courts, are going through is to have some activities in the community. So, for example, they planted a communal garden in Ramle, and they celebrated Passover with residential care patients in Be'er Sheva. And there was like a soccer team that was established, consisting of participants and even defense attorneys and even prosecutors, and they were doing it as part of the rehabilitation program. So all these things, yes, for sure, could have just changed, right? The whole scores that the processes got. But again, having said that, we're just trying to show here what was going on in court, but we have to bear in mind also this thing. Yeah. Just to say a word about outcomes. So if you look at 14, 15, and 16, you see that despite the punitive framework which they operate, Iranian hearings produced in a significant minority of cases somewhat future-looking outcomes as well. They received, receiving an overall coding position halfway between the punitive and the restorative scales. Similarly, that this course involved not only legal and formal elements, but some needs-based considerations as well. So it's not that the Iranian hearings, the mainstream, was super, pure mainstream. We see that specifically in outcomes, it was more, more complex, right? It tilted more to the middle. We chose that court took into account also other considerations that are less, past-oriented, attributive, incapacitative, and so on. Okay. So before jumping into this, so this was the empirical study that we just made. But now I'll tell you that before jumping to this empirical comparison between these three justice mechanisms, Tali and I made tentative theoretical assumptions regarding the relative positioning of 6 different justice mechanisms in their ideal form along the various parameters of the taxonomy. And we did this in that paper where we developed the methodology. When we showed the methodology and gave the definitions of the characteristics, then we just took tentative 6 processes and we said, okay, let us show you how you should, analyze different processes utilizing this methodology. And what we did, we chose mainstream criminal process, domestic violence problem-solving court, because it takes into account victims. Victims are very, very strong there. Restorative sentencing juries with an envisioned process suggested by Stefanos Bibas in his book, The Machinery of Criminal Justice. We took problem-solving courts. Therapeutic Settlement Conference is a very interesting process that is operated in Arizona. It brings together in a plea of the offender the offender, the prosecutor, and a representative of the victim. And it gives each one of them the option to offer sentencing, to offer sentencing that they think that fits the case. And the point that it uses the technique of the last best offer. So each one of them, so the judge can choose only one of these offers, what gives the parties as an incentive to offer a reasonable sentence, right? Because each part wants the judge to choose the sentence that he offered. So it brings them quite close to each other, and then the judge. So it's very interesting, and it combines within a regular plea also victims and discussion, and there is also a room for a dialogue between victims and offenders. Very, very interesting one, and restorative justice. And what we try to do here in the tentative theoretical analysis is to try to analyze each one of these processes according to its ideal form, according to how it's supposed to operate in the literature, and so this is a very tentative theoretical analysis that shows the relative positioning of each one of the processes relatively to the other. So this was the assumption that we made. And after we went to the field and checked the concrete processes in practice, we continued back to the theoretical taxonomy to see if we can find some gaps between law in books and law in action. That was basically the idea, to see, if and to what extent we can find gaps here. And if we compare between the theoretical taxonomy and the empirical finding, you will notice some gaps. And as I demonstrated, there were some findings that were unexpected relating to each one of the mechanisms. And the question is, what is the meaning of these deviations of the actual programs from the theoretical assumptions regarding their modus of operation? And here I think we can suggest two short explanations. So one possible conclusion is that in reality, the different doors existing in the criminal justice system, they do not lead to completely different outcomes, and they do not always take significantly different routes. They often intersect. They operate in proximity to each other, and they even blend. We can see that community courts still operate within the court construct, and thus they may sometimes align with arraignment hearings. For example, in the exclusion of victims and in the conserving the state monopoly and enforcer. Restorative justice offers dramatically different understanding of crime and its aftermath. But again, actual restorative justice processes, they still depend largely on the state to approve their outcomes, and thus they don't go all the way towards the restorative ideal. So that's why we find them sometimes closer than we could expect them, right? Another possible conclusion is that our findings merely portray specific programs in a specific time. It doesn't mean that that's the way they operate today. It doesn't mean that these three processes operate like this in other countries or in other places. So we just took a snapshot here of a specific place in a specific time, and the question is how much we can learn about these, the essence of these processes only through this examination. And for sure, more studies analyzing additional programs in additional places may provide more conclusive evidence as to the actual directions that the various doors of the criminal justice system take. But nevertheless, I think that even at this early stage, we believe, with necessary caution, of course, that the current study can give us, some general sense, but about the uniqueness of each one of the mechanism, of course, with the limitations that I just mentioned. For sure, it's just a pilot, right? So to conclude, maybe a word about the potential contribution of the methodology for analyzing various justice mechanisms. So I want to go again to make a zoom out and to say a word about the methodology. First, using the taxonomy, it uncovers first the multiplicity of procedures and values that they represent, they help us justify distinctive characteristics of justice mechanisms without prioritizing specific mechanisms or characteristics. Second, in the macro level, it helps identify mechanisms that should be developed in given jurisdictions. After more and more mechanisms are coded, we will reach to a very detailed map, right? A chart consists of various processes which policymakers could use for identifying mechanisms that seem to promote their own normative preferences. For example, if policymakers are interested in strengthening communities, it will be very helpful for them to consider develop justice mechanisms that are strong in specific characteristics like lay-centered, like inclusiveness, like community managed versus state managed, and communitarian versus liberal, and more. Third, in the micro level, the taxonomy may help program managers just to assess model fidelity, namely the adherence to the principles of this process to the principles of the program. Studies have demonstrated that strong model fidelity, it can predict effectiveness, and therefore programs managers can use this coding methodology to track gaps between the way that the specific program operates and the way it should operate, in theory, and then to change and to make changes, to learn from it. And this is exactly what happened with the Mosaic Restorative Justice program. They received from us the coding results, and they made a few changes in the process so that it would be more, what they decided that it would be, right? And finally, the methodology can be useful for analyzing future innovative justice mechanisms that might be developed in the multi-door criminal justice. So if we speak about, public policy today and tomorrow, this is also a tool that might be used for the analysis of future processes as well. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hadar, for this excellent and hugely informative presentation. Now I open the Q&A part. Before I ask you to ask questions, please let me just give one comment. I like your presentation very much due to two reasons, maybe. First, it offers a kind of empirical approach to verify, let's say, innovative theoretical ideas. And this is exactly what, at least to me, public policy, and in particular legal policy, is all about. Just to, find a way to gather data against which you can somehow mercilessly sometimes verify something that may sound, great, but when confronted with reality, it turns out that there is no magical wand that can solve miraculously all, let's say, difficulties and obstacles that we have in the traditional criminal justice approach, this retributive one. So this is exactly this, let's say, conclusion that without entering into details, even without entering into details, somehow proves the merits and, let's say, value of the research. That it is not something that looks too good or too gloomy to be true. Simply, so the truth is usually at the end less spectacular than it seems at the very beginning. Okay, so. Who would like to be? I have a lot of questions, actually. There's a full sheet of paper questions, but
thank you very much for it was a very interesting presentation. I also had a full sheet of paper, but I will only ask one question about the taxonomy. Because when you presented your taxonomy, my first impression was that it's huge. Very huge, 17 factors. And my first, I was wondering whether or not they don't intermix in ways. So I want to ask you about, can you tell us something about how you define the elements? Because I was thinking, for example, hierarchical and professionally oriented, or needs-based and emotional discourse, rehabilitative and future-oriented, flexible and non-hierarchical. They seemed very close.
Yes.
And for example, I think it's hard to imagine, for example, hierarchical process that it's not professionally oriented in a way. So my question is also whether or not this taxonomy, the hugeness of this taxonomy can distort the results, and the factors, they lose some of their explicitness, because if maybe there will be less of them, they will be more informative about what is the clear difference between different of the processes.
Great. So great question, right? It's you basically speak about the problem which is called which we call a double counting problem in methodology, right? We sometimes use specific, variables that are they just repeat one over the other, and then the question is, why do we need them, right? Maybe we'll just unify them in a way that would give us cluster. It's called in methodology cluster analysis. Yeah, sometimes we want to, if you see that the specific characteristics that go together, like you said, mostly hierarchical processes would be also professional oriented or so. Maybe we should just put them together. We see if they run together, and if yes, we should unify them. So my answer would be that, of course you can. I mean, of course we could, we could just shorten the list and reach to 10, maybe 8 parameters, for sure. The reason that we did it is, first, we wanted to have we wanted to have a way to make sure that our analysis is consistent. And then, so there are some overlappings. In some senses, there might be overlapping between the characteristics, but we think in this case that it just strengthens the validity of the taxonomy. Because if you see that characteristics that it seems reasonable that they come together, they don't come together, it says something about the tool. So we were not that worried about this small overlapping, but the opposite. I mean, we thought that it might give us kind of security spare, right? Tools to make sure that we reach to if everything is consistent, it's good. But then I'll tell you more than this. The process of creating the taxonomy was very interesting. We started with sitting separately, Tali and I. Each one of us just thought about characteristics, about traits that might, characterize processes, and we made a list, separately. And then we came and we just compared what we thought, and it was amazing to see that we thought about many, mutual common characteristics. And then we didn't stop here. We sent this very tentative first, a draft of sketch of the taxonomy to many different, to many friends, many law professors and academics, and people which are in the field, and people who work in programs and so. And we asked them to give us kind of feedbacks about these characteristics, about these parameters, and they gave us great input. For example, I remember that at the beginning, we the parameter of victim orientation and offender orientation, we designed it as one scale with two opposing ends: victim orientation versus offender orientation. And then Anthony Duff, he said, but just a second, I mean, this is not the opposite, right? A process might be victim-oriented and offender-oriented, restorative justice, right? And also the same, so we just split it to two different scales. And then we received many other, rejections or kind of comments to different, to other different parameters, and we just fixed it. And we give a very strict and clear definition in the paper that presented this methodology. And I think that when you look very carefully at each one of them, you can see differences. There are differences. So it's true that, naturally or generally speaking, processes that are hierarchical would be more professional centered, right? But we can think about even community courts. I mean, we can think about a process that is very professional oriented, like we found community courts here. It is run by professionals, the judge is the leader, the stakeholders, the professional stakeholders, they decide everything, but still it's less hierarchy because it's less hierarchical, because still the judge speaks with the offender and not above his head, like in the mainstream process. He still calls him in a private name. You can see still that even the architecture of the court is sometimes designed differently. I remember that Tali and I were visited in the Red Bull Community Justice Center in New York, and they built the court in a way that the judge just sits here. He's not, on a stage. He just sits here, just like me and you, in order to create this kind of physical environment which is less hierarchical. It doesn't mean that it's not professional oriented. It's super professional oriented. The judge is the boss, right? But you can see that. So there might be, generally speaking, you might find small overlapping or tendency to go together between few characteristics, but still you can see that most of them have distinctive definitions. And of course, you're right. We could have just done it differently, but that's the way it is. And I think that there are pluses and there are minuses here. Sometimes, a too detailed methodology might be exhausting, might be too hard to implement. I remember that the coders they went to the field and they needed to fill in 17 parameters in arraignment hearings, which are very swift processes. They didn't have even the time, right? Just to see what's going on, to have time to fill everything, and so it was hard. Yeah, community courts they had more time, they did it. And restorative justice was archival analysis of documentation was not a problem, but it's also something that you take into consideration when you build a methodology, right? You want it to be friendly to users, right? But we thought that would be, the first tool, and of course we are very open to make changes in it. So thanks.
Congratulations, it was very interesting. The most interesting for me was that the community courts is not oriented to victims. Did you try to understand it? Did you try to find interpret this? Why members of community courts are not interested
in victims.
Of perspective of victims?
Right. Yes. So sure. So we expected to have a higher score also in this parameter, and I think the answer here is I will split it to few answers. First, community problem-solving courts as a general model. It's a model that focuses on offenders, even in theory. I mean, the whole problem is to put the light on the torch on the offender, to try to understand the causes that lead him to crime, and to build and to really tailor-made for him a rehabilitation plan that would help him not to recidivize. So this is, even in the books, it's a very offender-oriented process. But community courts, which is a variant of problem-solving court, it involves the community. It's a specific problem-solving court that also tries to bring the community in and to integrate it. And that's why we thought, okay, so it's okay that, in theory, usually problem-solving courts are offender-oriented, but this is a community court which declares explicitly that, his goal is also to involve community, and who is from the community is not to first be there other than the victim. And I think that the answer is first that many of the offenses were victimless. Think about drugs. Think about other offenses that do not involve victims. So many offenders just came and there were no victims. So for sure, it just got very low grade.
But community could be a victim, yes?
Oh, that's true.
Right.
That's true. So this is a good question about definition. How we define victim, right? So you may say that community and society is victim. But I think that the whole point is to differentiate between processes. And if we look at the society as a victim, so all processes, they take into account victim, right? Because all processes are related to society and in the public interest. So we define the victim as the stakeholder that was directly to be affected from the offense. Of course, the society is like a secondary victim, right? But we wanted the first one. The second answer is that bear in mind that this empirical study was done only at the beginning of this operation of the model in Israel. So we caught here like the first 2 years of this model in Israel, which means that the model itself was not, structured enough. It was just, a matter of trying and changing, and they did themselves, the program managers, and they didn't know it themselves how exactly to do it. So they started to do it, and I can tell you that Tali and I, when we published the final report of the formative study, one of the recommendations was to give some attention to the questions of victims and the role in these processes. And I can tell you now that when we were conducting the evaluation study and Beersheba and Ramle getting into their sixth year, I can tell you that it's different. We already see that victims are more integrated, that they took it into account, and they were trying to use these results from utilizing this methodology to change and to make changes, to be aware. They didn't even aware that was the case, and in the report we actually we mentioned it, and now that they're trying to work on it. So it's true. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
May I?
Yes, sure.
Maybe my question is not very sophisticated, but I am really very curious. As I know, I hope that I am right, that Tel Aviv is very open city, very liberal. Beersheba is rather traditional. And you have traced courts from Beersheba and from Tel Aviv, yes, for among others. Let me know, have you discovered in your research, great research, any differences in attitude to, for example, offenders, victims, or generally in arranging all the procedures? For example, maybe Beersheba solutions are more past-oriented, and Tel Aviv is more future-oriented. Let me know. I just
that's a great question. You basically asked about cultural potential differences that we might find in the same model, but which operates in different places.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did, we tried also to compare between Beersheba and Ramle. I mean, because what I show you here is the average of Beersheba and Ramle together, right? But it's interesting to see when you split it, if you can find some differences between these two courts. And I think that you're right, that it was nice to take two cities that are, they're different from each other. Beersheba takes it, both are very heterogeneous cities, both have population, include also population with low income, socio-demographic, profiles and more. Beersheba includes also the Bedouin in the Negev, in the desert, and Ramle also includes white Arab population. So, and the question, and the answer is that we did find some, differences, but not much. We found that the Beersheba community court, which was the first to be opened, Ramle was opened only a year after. It was more. It had a greater model fidelity rather than the Ramle. We saw that the older court, which is Beersheba, it produced scores that were more aligned with the model in theory than the new one in Ramle, which was just operating a year. So we can say, again, with caution, that it makes sense that when a program is operating more time, and it becomes to be older, of course its performance are better, even in terms of implementing, from learning from what was until now and trying to implement, trying to change. So now with the evaluation study, it's interesting because we have Beersheba, which is 6 years old, almost, and Ramle, which is almost 5 years old, and Tel Aviv, which is a year and a half old, and we have the new port in Jerusalem that will just open now. And this is also going to be very interesting now to compare we're going to do it, to compare between them and to actually first trying to discover if we can find some cultural, if culture might be an explanation to some differences between them, and also time of existence, which is also something that might affect the way that it works. Because we just learn from the past. We have the opportunity to change. But I'm sure that there is the component of culture is here, and I would be super interesting to see how this kind of coding would operate in different countries. Here in Poland or elsewhere in Europe, and also in the States. I'm sure, Tali and I, we were visiting the Redwood Community Justice Center, and while I was in California, I've been there for 2 years, so I went to conduct some observations at the drug courts in the Alameda County in California, in the San Francisco area, and I can tell you, it's different. I already saw, some different interactions, the profile of the offender are a little bit different, right? So you see, there is an effect. How much the effect is big, we should code and see, right? And we should maybe take the same coders to these different processes to see. But I think that's the whole idea. To collect as much coding as possible, and as we get big numbers, we'll be able to, to generalize more. Okay, thanks.
So I will allow myself to ask one question that which I have to pose as a legal theorist, because I don't feel very comfortable talking about methodological details, but I feel much more confident, when we are staying at the, let's say, general picture, big picture.
So I'm a theory person, Tal is the expert in technology, yes. Exactly. I'm with you.
But let me put it this way, that this traditional retributive, adversarial, mainstream criminal justice, some say that it is just the more civilized realization of the revenge instinct. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, possibly it's true, at least in the sense that it is based on certain assumptions about, let's say, human nature, human needs, and so on. Now, we have those attempts to go away from that mainstream method and look for better solutions. And my question is, to what extent, in your opinion, they are results of just dissatisfaction of the effects of this traditional criminal justice way, and to what extent they reflect somehow changing assumptions about human nature, what make people criminals, and what are the conditions that facilitate the potential perpetrators to engage into criminal activity and so on. What can be a cure? It is not an accident that it is called therapeutic in some sense. Yeah. The question is about the relationship between those methods and, let's say, some underlying, I wouldn't call it ideology, but a set of, let's say, premises or assumptions about the crime and criminal activity as such.
Yeah. So I think that the answer is both. I think that you see the emergence of this criminal justice mechanisms, how we call it here, the new processes, the alternatives basically to the adversarial one, they emerged because of first because of frustration from the current criminal justice system. In the US today we have a very large debate about the mass incarceration problem and the fact that the system just doesn't work. Not in terms of cost-benefit analysis. It's very expensive. It doesn't do the job. People that are getting into jail, they're just they're resolving door syndrome. They're getting again, and nobody is satisfied. Also not victims that are just out of the picture. So the question is, why do we still operate this kind of mechanism that historically is here? So I think that that one of the reasons for the emergence of these processes is totally practical. I mean, it came from the feeling that something doesn't work. But I think that at the same time, there is a deeper, reason here, which lies on developing new theoretical assumptions about the nature of human, about the nature of crime, about the idea of the society that should be more responsible to the way an offender behaves, to a question of social responsibility, right? We can see here more positivist in the criminology, criminology theory, more positivist theories that actually perceive an offender not as an individual, autonomous, agent that has free will, and he really can choose whether to do it or not, and he's very rational. He calculates everything. Of course, restorative justice, for example, is a theory that totally adopts different ideological roots here. They perceive crime differently, not as kind of a violation of abstract social values, but as something that damages relationships and people. They see the people in the relationships as the target, of a crime, and not kind of a public interest, general public interest. So of course there is also different ideologies that are here. I think Howard Zare, in his book about the third lenses, where he actually tries to to develop the idea of restorative justice. Also, John Braithwaite in his many great writings and book and papers, they describe restorative justice as a totally new understanding of what is crime, of the way we should look at offenders. And of course, their conclusion is that because we perceive crime so differently, and we perceive the offender so differently than in the liberal classic, criminal law, for sure we need to adopt, different responses. It's like the obvious.
One just follow-up question, because there is also a victim that we already talked about a little bit, but don't you think that there is also an aspect of the whole story, let's say, which relates to some kind of a need of a revenge on the side of a victim, that this is a part of, let's say, that these traditional criminal justice mechanisms were designed also to address, let's say, that need of a victim, that because I suffered because of a criminal, so I expect that he or she will also suffer, in order to restore balance in the galaxy, to speak of Star Wars language.
Yes, so this is also a great point, and I must answer you in relating to another study that I'm conducting just today about victims' needs. So the stereotype is that victims seek revenge, right? They want to get revenge because they want the offender or someone who damaged them to be damaged as well. I'm conducting today a study with a media scholar, Dr. Anat Peleg, about the way that sexual assault victims about their needs, what kind of needs do they have, how subjectively they perceive each one of the needs as important for them. And the study tries to understand how do they perceive the ability of the criminal justice system to address their needs as opposed to the social media. So we focus on sexual assault victims who were active on Facebook about criminal sexual assault discourse. And what we were trying to do is we just circulated a survey, and 500 sexual assault victims answered this survey. We showed them a list of 18 different potential needs that victim might have according to the victimology literature and according to some in-depth interviews we conducted with victims.
Some of them are more therapeutic, like getting recognition of the assault, or voicing, or getting support, or trying to other therapeutic ones. Some were more punishment oriented, like getting compensation, getting severe punishment, deterrence, incapacitation, and so. And some were more social oriented, like just raising the awareness of the public to sexual assault or achieving justice. And then we told them, okay, look at this list of 18 needs and indicate on a scale from 1 to 5 how much each one of the needs is important for you. And the results are very interesting. You see that out of 18 needs, revenge, which was one of the needs, was rated as the lowest one, and it was the only need that were rated under the average score of 3. It was 2.1, I think, or so. So of course it's a self-reported study, right? So maybe there might be bias here. People may say that they don't want revenge because they don't feel, although it's anonymous, right? It's not, but still, people may tell themselves a story that make them feel better. But but having said that, still you see a very, this revenge was significantly different from other groups that came together. And I think that first, the assumption that victim really wants revenge is an assumption that is more stereotyped. It's for sure there are victims that's what they want, no doubt. But I think victim much more interested in getting therapeutic responses. They really want to be recognized. They want to get their day in court to express themselves. They want to get information. They want to have control. Again, they want to sometimes to receive apology, right? They want to get answers to questions that they have. Why did you do it specifically to me? And sometimes when you see, even with the Me Too movement, right? That when offenders took responsibility, I mean alleged offenders took responsibility and just expressed their regret over what they did, victims many times just forget them. Right? You see the more tensious, interactions when they deny it and when they put the blame on victims. So I'm not sure that revenge is indeed the most important, need for victims. For sure, for some of them, yes, but it's more complicated. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So if there are no more questions, so thank you once again, Hadar.